Hello everyone, my name is Nathan and today it's time for another episode of Let's Make a Game. Yes, finally we get back into it and I thought, what the heck do I want to do for today's episode? And I think I just have the perfect project. So this game, I'm really not sure into which direction we are in the end gonna go, but what I do know is that I want to implement stuff that I'm currently fond of, and I've always been fond of space and 4X strategy games, or at least expansion games, and I really don't want to restrict myself to one world only. So in case you were wondering, this is not going to be the final product or the final room of the game, it's just one of the worlds that we can or will have the possibility to inhabit. So instead of continuing working on that shebang, for today we're gonna do something totally different and actually start creating solar systems. So as per usual, in order to get this started, we will have to create a few things. So I'm gonna go with a bunch of sprites first. So the first sprite I'm gonna call stars. And for the time being, we're just gonna make 3 or so sprites for the stars. And as per usual, they're gonna be very simplistic so that we can get to the meat of the episode, which isn't graphical stuff, but rather the coding process. So the first sun was yellow, let's make a red sun, maybe 2, and there are like white dwarfs or so. Do they have a color like this? Ah well. In the end it doesn't matter because all of these sprites of course are gonna be replaced. Anyhow, what we want to do is also set the origin of the sprite to the center. Anyhow, the stars are taken care of. Let's also do the same thing with Sprite Planets. I'm also gonna create one single sprite for the planets, or actually we're going to create 3 sprites, but it's gonna be in one single sprite. We can go with some kind of a green planet, I guess those are gonna be colonizable. Then maybe we have some kind of a lava type planet, and last but not least we could have an ocean planet. Oh, this looks more like a black hole. We want an ocean. And in case you were wondering, of course, we're gonna have multiple solar systems. My aim is actually to create a small galaxy with planetary systems that are randomly generated. Good, so now that we have our stars and planets, let's also create a bunch of scripts that we're gonna use later. The first script I'm gonna call Star System Generation. Okay, let's also give this the title as per usual. So far so good, let's create another one. The second script is gonna be called Planet Creation. I think that is a nifty name for it. And then last but not least, we need yet another script in today's episode. That script is gonna be called Script Orbital Movement. Yeah, let's go with Orbital Movements. Beautiful, all the scripts are created. Of course they need to be going on an object, so I guess that's the next thing we're gonna do. What I first want to go for is actually another core object. I'm gonna call this Core Star Systems. And we're gonna give this the same sprite as our usual core. What I want to add here is a key release event. Let's go with space, it doesn't matter for the time being. I just want the ability to actually restart the current room so that we can, you know, check out the generation without having to restart the game. So this core thingy-majingy of course will have to go into a different kind of room. So maybe that's what we do now. We create yet another room, which is not the main room, so the room where the worlds are, but it's gonna be the room star systems, I guess. I mean, why give it a different name? And also, I want this one to be actually square. So we're gonna do 1000 by 1000 pixels for the time being with a speed of 60. And that is possibly... No, we have to spawn an object first. Of course, we want to spawn the core star systems. But also I want to spawn one of my suns or my stars. And for that, of course, we need to have it in our objects list right here. So let's create a new object corresponding to our stars and also our planets. Give this a good sprite. A resource with that name. Ah, of course, it needs to be object, not sprite. There we go. Then one more object, which is object planets, and of course that requires the Sprite Planets. There we go. Now we should be able to spawn one of our stars, and it's gonna go right here, I guess. It doesn't really matter. We're gonna set the default placement using scripting, of course. Great, okay, so we have made this new room, Star Systems. However, we need to make sure it is above our main room, so that once we start the game, this room is chosen. It's always the first room in the list. Before we go to scripting, you should actually know where the stuff is gonna go. So we are gonna have a create event. That means as soon as the room starts, it is going to execute the script because we have already placed the star. And the script is Star Systems Generation. And also we want... no, that is actually all we want to add on the stars. On the planets though, we want to add two events. One is going to be the create and another one the step event. On the create event, we of course want to call the script planet creation. And then last but not least, on the step event, we are gonna add the orbital movements. Great, now that we know everything, have set up everything, it's time to go to scripting. Let's first of all have a look into the star system generation. This code is going to be used to basically decide which sprite the sun is going to have, how large the sun is going to be, how many planets are going to orbit around it, etc, etc. So let's first go ahead and do something with the star. I want to make it randomly sized, so it's not always the same sized star. Of course the star at the moment in its default size is 64 by 64. However, we can use the image X scale and we can set a random number to it. And of course, number 1 would mean full size and number 0 would mean nothing. And we can even go above it, so 1.5 would be 50% bigger than normal. So I would say we do a random 1, that means 0 to 1, but then we add 0.5 to it. That basically means the lowest it will be is 0.5, half the size, or the highest it will be is 1.5, 50% bigger. We're gonna do the same thing with the image Y scale, but this one we can just set equal to image X scale because we have already done the calculations above and we want the object to remain round. Next up, we're gonna set the sun in the center of this room, which means X equals room width divided by 2 and Y equals room height divided by 2. And of course that reminds me, we should also set in the sprites of the planet the origin to the center. So the next thing we want to do is set the image. So let's just first do an image speed equals 0, so it's not gonna switch between all the various sun versions that we have, or star versions. And we also want to set the sprite. So I'm gonna use a custom variable. This is nothing from GameMaker, it's just a variable. I'm gonna say floor random 3 and then it will choose a random thing between 0 and 2, right? Because we round it down. That means I can say switch sprite in order to check all the various cases, and of course case 0 would mean we want the image index to also equal 0. And after that we want to make a break. Same thing with case 1, image index 1, etc, etc. And there we go, I set all of the stuff that is necessary to set. What we should be having is a sun in the center of the room, in various sizes and with various images. Next up, let's do something with the planets. We want to spawn a bunch of planets, right? And we want to spawn them at a random distance towards the sun. First of all, let's decide for a random amount of planets that can be in one system. So I'm gonna define a variable. I'm gonna say planets equals round, which means rounding up. I do not want 0 planets. Well, we could also have 0 planets. I mean, why the heck not? But with this, we will always at least have 1 planet, at least I believe so. Up to a maximum of 9 planets, possibly? No, just up to a maximum of 8, of course. If you had the floor, it would be a maximum of 7 and a minimum of 0. Let's also define the variable p, which stands for planets, and now we're gonna go with a for loop, and we're gonna say p equals 0, which of course means we start with 0 planets, and then we want to slowly start to generate them. So as long as the planet amount is still below our variable we defined on the top here, As long as that is the case, we want to raise the planet size by 1. Okie dokie. Now we can set a random X and a random Y variable in order to spawn them at a random location within the room. And I'm gonna go with a random room width minus 400 actually, so it is at least 200 away from the edge of the room. And the reason it is 200 is because we are gonna add 200 to here. So it's 200 on both sides. I'm gonna do the same thing for the Y random room height minus 400 plus 200. There we go. And now that we have defined these X and Y coordinates, we can simply create a random X, a random Y object planets. Okay, I made a mistake here, but there we go, fixed. Now that is, I believe, all we have to do for now. Let's actually check the game just in case we have made a slight error. But yeah, there we go. You can actually see it. The sun is right here in the center where it is supposed to be, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets in this case. If I restart the room with the spacebar, we have even more planets. Now we just have 1. Now we have 2. You can also see the sun is getting bigger or smaller and taking other pictures. However, the planet pictures or images are still going through because we haven't set the image speed to 0 for them as well. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to open up the planet creation script. And of course that is on the create event of the planets. So what I want to do first of all here is the same thing as with the stars. We want to X scale and Y scale them. And I'm going to go with a little different calculation here. We're going to say random 0.5 plus 0.5. That means they are at least half their original size, so at least 16 pixels, but they can go all the way up to 32 pixels, which would result in the number 1, or a scaling of 1. And image Y scale is gonna equal to image X scale as before. Also, don't forget about the image speed, so the images don't flicker anymore, and now we can basically copy over the same thing we did before right here. So we're just gonna copy this sprite thing and the switch statement in order to set all of the images right here. We can go with the same exact thing since we have 3 images for both of them. Good. Next up, I want to leave a little section free for the moons. Of course, we're gonna have also moons. I mean, why the heck not, guys? However, we're gonna leave that out for today's episode. What I first want to do is initiate a bunch of variables. Let's just call it that. Initiate variables. The first variable is gonna be self-target, and that basically means around which object do we want to rotate. And of course, for the planets, that's gonna be the object stars. Then next up, we want to set the orbital speed of the objects, and they shouldn't all be the same speed. I think I'm gonna go with 0.5. It might be way too high, 0.5. I suspect we have to go with 0.1 or even lower. Anyways, the orbital speed, then we also want to set the distance to the target, which should be the distance to object, and of course the object is stars, right? So I think that is self-explanatory. We always want to keep the same distance. That also means we cannot have oval orbits for the time being. It's always going to be a perfect orbit. Last but not least, I want to set the current position in orbit, and that basically means if you set this to 0, it will start on the right side of the star. If you set it to 90, it will probably start on the top, or yeah, it will start on the top actually. And if you set it to -90, it will start on the bottom. However, I want the planets to have a random position. So of course, we're also gonna set that to random 360. If I can type correctly, there we go. Okay, we initiated all of these variables. Let's leave this open because I will have to type those guys in again and I probably will not remember. However, we are gonna take care of the orbital movements now. So what do we have to do here? Currently we have the planets, they are at a random location. What we want to do in this step event is to make them move. And this is actually much easier than you would anticipate. All we needed were these basic variables right here that are being initiated on the planets themselves. This moon section, ignore this. This actually still belongs to the planets. So I'm guessing what we have to do is make the moon section down below. So it makes a little bit more sense code-wise. However, let's do this. Every step we want to set the x coordinate to the self-target x coordinate. So the planet should be going directly in the same x position as our star. However, we're of course gonna manipulate this with a new function that I have never used before, namely the length direction. Oh man, I cannot type. There we go, of x. And we want to set this to self-distance to target for the length, and for the direction, of course, we want to use self-current position in orbit. Very good. We can do the same thing for the y coordinate. So self-target y plus length direction y, self-distance to target self.current position in orbit. Man, I should really copy over those things, but you know, sometimes it's just fun to type. So this is a very cool function. It will basically allow us to always keep the same distance, and I just see that there is another mistake. However, we keep the same distance towards the target, no matter what the heck we are doing. And also, what the heck did I do here? Oh man, I should really copy over things. Yeah, position. Anyhow, there's one more thing we need to do, of course, and that is we need to set the current position in orbit a little bit further away, so the planet actually moves. And we're gonna do that using the orbital speed. So we want to set the self-current position in orbit to plus equals self-orbital speed. Okay, now I guess it's time to start up the game, check the code for any errors that are... No, there are actually no errors. And look at that, the planets are orbiting around the sun. They have different scales, they have different speeds and different distances, and oh my gosh, it kind of works perfectly. However, this guy right here is incredibly fast, so maybe we will have to kind of set the speed depending on the distance, so it makes a lot more sense. I mean, these inner planets should rotate a lot faster, I guess. Yeah, it's actually the inner planets that need a higher speed, because of course they are also experiencing higher gravity, and therefore they need to kind of be faster to keep up with that. Anyways, there's one more thing I want to do, because if we respawn the system a few times, you can see a bunch of planets are overlapping, and this would possibly not result in a good game experience. Also, a bunch of planets sometimes spawn in the sun, so I think what I'm gonna do is simply set up a temporary thing in order to get rid of this problem until we fix it a little bit more permanently. So if place meeting XY object stars, or place, I don't need a bracket here, meeting XY object planets. And of course I need another bracket right here. Anyways, what do we want to do then? We simply want to instance, oh my gosh, what is wrong? Instance destroy. There we go. That's what we want to do. So now all the planets that are too many or kind of getting into each other's way or in the way of the sun will be eliminated. You just saw one disappearing right there. Here we will be able to observe it a little bit better. There we go. The red one is disappearing. So that is actually good for now. Cool. Planetary orbits. Oh my gosh, this is great. Did you see one got consumed by the sun? But that is great, and of course we're gonna work on that a little bit more. So this is basically the planetary map, and the speed is simply too high. Let me actually set the speed maybe to 0.2, just so the planets will be much more clickable. Yeah, look at that. You can still see that they are kind of rotating at the moment, but you have plenty of time to hover over it with your mouse or even click it. And of course, clicking it would be necessary in order to actually visit the world and then get into a similar room as we currently have with our main room. With that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions, post them down below. Have a great time and see you soon. Bye bye.